Now, under design system documentation, we have looked at how to come up with an industry standard grid system. We have looked at how to come up with an industry standard typography system. In today's class, I want us to look at how to come up with an industry standard shadow or elevation system before we start looking at iconography and color system. You must have noticed that on some websites, like if I go over to this Amazon website, one of the applications of a shadow system is that it can be used to actually indicate system status. If I come over here, you can see that we have 3 cards over here. There are different ways to actually indicate system status. You could decide to use a shadow system. You could decide to use an outline. There are a lot of ways that you could use to actually indicate system status. Now, system status with respect to what? You can see that we have 3 cards over here. And in their default states, you can see we have a very little shadow effect applied to these 3 cards that I have here. And that is what actually looks like an outline over here. Or you can see that, or better still, in their default state, we have something like an outline applied to them. But the moment I hover on this, you can see that there's an elevation, right, that is applied to this particular card, letting me know that I am currently hovering on this card. If I move to the next card, the elevation moves or shows on the next. If I move to the third card, you can see that the elevation is now indicated on this third card. Now, this is an application of shadow system naturally indicating system status, because now I know that I am in the hover state for this card. Now, once I move to this card, I am now actually hovering on this card, and just like that. So this is one of the applications of shadow system in design. Also, if I come to this website, you can see that for this button over here, the button in its default state is not actually looking flat, right? You can see that this button over here is not looking flat. There's actually a little outline at the bottom here, letting me know that this button is actually an elevated button. So this button has an amount of elevation. That's what makes the button actually looks real, or enables the user to actually know that they can interact with this particular button. And that's why there's a little elevation here. So the question becomes, how do you come up with a shadow system or an elevation system whenever you're about to make a design? So I want to look at how to come up with such a shadow system or an elevation system so that we can always apply it whenever we need it. Now, for us to do that, I'm going to come over here and then create a frame. I'll create a frame. Then on this frame, I'm going to draw a couple of rectangles. I'll hold and drag on this. Draw this rectangle here. Then I'll make sure that the rectangle and the frame have the same background color. So this is set to a background color of pure white. So I'll put in F in 6 places. Now I have this. I'll make a copy of this rectangle by holding my hotkey. Place the copy here. Make another copy. Place it here. I'm going to create 6 rectangles quickly. And I have something like this. So before we come up with a shadow system or an elevation system that we can use to indicate system status, be it on a default state or a hover state or other states, the first thing you want to know is you want to actually understand how to apply shadow tokens to a particular layout. So for this rectangle, I'll select it, and then I'll come over to my properties panel and I'll go to where it says effects. Under effects, I want to apply an effect to it because a shadow is actually an effect, right? It's a shadow effect. So I'll come over to this icon, this plus icon that says add effects. I'll click on it. And once I click on it, by default, Figma is going to add a drop shadow effect. Now, there are other effects that you could add. We have inner shadow effect, layer blur effect, background blur, noise, and texture. We've treated this before. But in our case, we want to add a drop shadow effect. So I'll click on drop shadow effects. By clicking on that, you can see that if I come back to this particular frame, I have 6 rectangles here, but you can see that one is actually showing or displaying an elevation right now. You can see that this particular rectangle is already looking elevated as compared to every other rectangle that I have. That's why you see something like a line here. That is actually not a line, that's a shadow effect. You can see it at the bottom, at the right, and at the left over here. But you select this, the moment you actually click on that add button, Figma is going to give it a drop shadow effect with some token values. Now you can see that for this case, I have that for the drop shadow effect, I have position values in terms of X and Y values. I also have a blur value, a spread value, and I have a color value. Now, by default, Figma has given this particular rectangle these default values, and you could decide to actually change the value. So if I come over here, select the frame, and then let's say I make a copy of this. I'll copy that and I'll use it to replace this rectangle here. I'll paste to replace. Now I have the same rectangle with the same elevation here and here. So I'll select this and I'll change the default value that Figma has given to it. So over here now I can see that it has this particular x value of 0. Let's leave that set as 0. It has a y value of 4. If I decide to change this to, let's say, 20, let's see what's going to happen. Now you can see that we have more of the shadow effect at the bottom here, which simply means that this y value actually extends the shadow effect at the base of the object. Now that's fine. If I should come over here to the x value, if I make that, let's say, 24, you can see that we have the shadow effect at the right here. All right, let me change that to 24. I have the shadow effect at the right here, which simply means that the x value is responsible for adding the shadow effect at the right hand side of the object, which is also fine. Now, after that, I also have other properties here that we are going to try to understand quickly, since we have actually treated this before and we're just having a recap. Now, what does the blur value, what does it do? Now, you can see that over here, when I create the shadow effect is coming like or as a straight line, right? You can see that there's this straight edge here, letting me know where the shadow stops. There's also this straight edge here, letting me know where the shadow stops. Now, what the blur effect does is that it helps remove that distinctive or that very obvious straight line shadow. So if I should come over here and change this blur value to a value of, say, 50, you can see now that there's actually a difference. Now, for us to see the difference, I will undo that action, and then I'll make a copy of this, and I'll use it to replace this. So now I have two rectangles with the same effect. Alright, so if I should come over here and apply the blur value to it, if I give this a blur value of, let's say, 50, automatically you can see now that if I'm to compare the shadow effect here and the shadow effect here, you can see that the shadow effect here is actually darker, and you can see that there's an outline, like a very sharp outline showing where the shadow has ended, right, at the right and at the bottom. But over here, when I increase the blur radius or the blur value, you can now see that the shadow effect does not have that very sharp outline anymore, right? Just because a blur effect has been added to it. So this shadow effect is now looking way better compared to what we have here. Alright, so this looks like a shadow with an outline, but once you add the blur effect to it, this is what you are going to be getting. So that's what the blur effect actually does. So we now know what the x value does, what the y value does. We now know that there's a blur value that actually helps to reduce the presence or the intensity of that outline for the shadow effect. And also there's what is referred to as a spread value. So if I should come over here now, for example, and let's see what we are going to have if I select this rectangle. Let's copy that. Let's use it to replace this so we can actually compare whatever happens once we add a new property to the shadow effect. Now these two rectangles have the same shadow effect, right, or the same shadow token. So if I select this and I want to see what happens when I apply a spread property, right now the spread is set to 0. I'm going to change that spread from 0 to a value of, let's say, 20. Now you can see what happens when I give this a spread value of 20. You can see that the shadow effect now covers more area compared to the way it was initially. So that's what the spread value there does. So we now know what the x value does. We now know what the y value does. We now know what the blur radius is, and we now know what the spread does. Now in this case, this talks about the color of the shadow. If you want a dark shadow, you can see that this is the color code for black, right? Which is 0 into 6 places, and that is why we have a dark shadow over here. But over here we have the opacity of the shadow set at 25%. Now you can always set this to whatever value that you want. So I could change this from 25 to, let's say, 40%, and I have a darker shadow. I could change that to 100%, and I have a very, very black shadow. All right. So with that, you now understand token values that you have here in terms of the x, y value, blur value, the spread value, and also the color value. And you can decide to actually apply a shadow effect to any object that you want. Now that we've done this, let's see how we could actually reference our material design guide and see the shadow effects that I use in the material design guide. Now for me to do that, I'm going to go over to my browser and click on material design 1. Now remember that while referencing material design, we've looked at material design 3, we've looked at material design 2, but in creating our shadows, we are going to be using material design 1. So I'll come over to this first result here that says material design, click on it. Once I click on it, the material design one guide is going to be opened. I'll click on this burger icon that I have over there. Scroll down to where it says resources, click on that, and then scroll down to where it says shadows, and then click on that. Right? Now you are going to see that we have quite a number of shadow values in the table that is given to us by material design. Because one question you may want to ask while coming up with a shadow effect is, let's say I want to apply a shadow effect to this object and I come over here to properties panel. What should be the value of what should be the X value? What should be the Y value? What should be the blur radius? What should be the spread property? What should be the opacity? How do you know that you have to set your value of X to, let's say, 24? How do you know that you have to set your value of Y to, let's say, 20? Now, these are some of the questions that you may want to ask when you are coming up with a shadow system. So, in order for us to answer that question, we are going to be referencing the material design guide. The material design guide gives us a table of elevation or of shadows, right? With all the token values that we need to actually come up with a shadow effect. So over here, I have, under this, I have shadow effects for Sketch, shadow effects for Illustrator, and shadow effects for Photoshop. Now, for this first table, it says the table to the right is a listing of shadow values for Sketch, right? Now, if you scroll down, you are going to see another category of tables. And over here, it says, this is under Illustrator. It says the table to the right is a listing of shadow values for Illustrator, and if you scroll down, you are going to get other shadow effects, in this case for Photoshop. Now you could decide to actually come up with reference shadows values using any of these tables. Now in my own case now, I'm going to be using this table for Sketch. Now over here, I have quite a number of shadow effects or quite a number of elevations with token values that I could use. So I have a 1dp elevation shadow. These are the values for a 1dp elevation shadow. I have a 2dp elevation shadow. You can see the values here. I have a 3dp elevation shadow. I have a 4dp, 6dp, 8dp, down to 9, 12. I also have a 16dp and even a 24dp elevation shadow. What we are going to do is that we are going to try to come up with reference shadow systems using these particular elevations that are given to us by material design. So I'm going to come back to this my frame and replace all of this with rectangles that have no effects yet. So I'm going to paste to replace. Now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rectangles over here. So let's say I select this rectangle and I want to give it a shadow effect, or better still, I want to give it a 1dp elevation shadow effect. I will come over to this table. Now on this table, the shadow effect is divided into two. We have key shadows and then we have the ambient shadow. Now under key shadows, we have the Umbra shadow and we have the Penumbra shadow. Then under the ambient shadow, we have the token values to actually be imputed inside our design. So I'll come over here. Under key shadows, let me assume that I want to create this Umbra shadow that I have here. Now to create this Umbra shadow, you can see we have all the values over here. Now they are letting us know that to create a 1dp Umbra shadow, I'm going to give that shadow an opacity of 14%. So I'll come over here. While you have the object selected, come to where it says effect, click on that plus icon that says create effect. Remember that we are creating a drop shadow, so you have to make sure that this is set to drop shadow. In this case, material design is letting us know that to create a 1dp elevation shadow, to give it an opacity of 14% if we are to create an Umbra shadow. So I'll come back here, I'll change this particular opacity to 14. Now I have that. So by changing it to 14, you can see that automatically we're already having a shadow effect here, right? You can see that there's a little line there representing the shadow effect. But since we are not done, we are going to put in all the other token values. So for the color, you know that the opacity will be 40% if we want to create this Umbra shadow. It's letting us know that we should leave the X value set to 0, we should leave the Y value set to 0. So I'll come over here. The X value, I'll set that to 0. The Y value, change that to 0, which is fine. And over here now, it says that we should give it a blur value of 2 and a spread of 0. So I'll come back here, give this a blur value of 2, and make sure that the spread is set to 0. That way, what I have created is actually what is referred to as the Umbra shadow. So I have that for the Umbra shadow, the opacity is 14, X is 0, Y is 0, spread is 0, the blur is 2. Alright? So if I come over here, I have X0, Y0, spread 0, and the blur is 2, and then I have the opacity of 14. So with that, now I put in the values for my Umbra shadow. Now let me try to put in values for another shadow effect. So I'll come over here. Click on this, and then in this case, I want to put in a penumbra shadow, or better still, you could decide to add the umbra shadow and the penumbra shadow to one particular object. But in my case now, let's see what I could do. Let's assume that I want to add this to another object, all right? So if I want to create a penumbra shadow, I'll give it an opacity of 12 as it is written here. So I'll come back here, select this, and then go to where it says effect, click on that drop down. In this case, it says I should give it an opacity of 12. I'll put in 12 there. That's fine. After that, it's letting me know that to create the penumbra shadow, the x value should be 0, the y value should be 2, right? So I'll come over here, x value, I'll leave that set to 0, the y value, I'll leave that set to 2, which is actually fine. Then I should come over here, give it a spread of 0. So I'll come over here for the spread, I'll leave that set to 0. And with that, I have created a penumbra shadow. Now you can see that these shadow values are actually very subtle values, right? You can see that the first one is looking almost invisible. But from the second one here, you can see that we have this very subtle shadow effect there. Alright? So this is for a penumbra shadow. So I have created the umbra shadow and the penumbra shadow. If I zoom in now, you are going to be seeing that we have an outline at the bottom here, letting me know that this is actually a very subtle shadow, right? You can see that we have this outline at the bottom here. We have it at the right here for this particular object, and also have it at the left here, which is actually a very subtle shadow. So we've created the umbra shadow and the penumbra shadow. After that, we also have what is referred to as the ambient shadow. So for that now, I'm going to set the opacity to 20. So I'll select the next object there. In my case, I'll come over here, give it an effect quickly, and then set the opacity to 20%. I'll come over here, change this to 20, which is fine. We're already seeing an outline at the bottom here. Alright. After that, for the ambient shadow, it's telling me to set the x value to 0, the y value to 1, and then the below value to 3. So I'll come over here, come back to my effects, and then x value 0, y value 1, below value 3, which is fine. And it's also letting me know that I should give it a spread of 0. So I'll come over here, for the spread value, I'll set that to 0. Now I have this as my what? As my ambient shadow. So now I have actually applied a shadow effect to this object, and this object, and you can see that there are very little effects, right? They are very subtle effects. By this shadow effect, they are very subtle effects. That's why you can see that there's just a very little representation of these shadows as we have them here. So now that we've known how to come up with the shadow values, that is for a 1 dp elevation. So if I should come over to, let's say, a 24 dp elevation, if I should come over here, it's letting me know that if I want to create a 24 dp elevation shadow, what I should do is, in this case, set the opacity to 14, right? Set the S value to 0. So let's quickly do that for that 24 dp elevation. So I'm going to select any of the rectangles that I have here. I'll select this, and let's give this the 24 dp elevation, letting me know that I should give it an opacity of 14. So I'll come over here for the opacity value. I'll set that to 14 quickly. I'll click on effects, give this an opacity of 14, which is fine. After that, I'll go back here. X value should be 0, Y should be 24, right? So I'll come back here, X0, I'll set the Y value to 24, which is fine. After that, the below value should be 38 and the spread should be 3. So for the below value, I'll set that to 38, and then for the spread, I'll set that to 3. And now I've created this particular 24 dp shadow. Now you can see that over here for the 1 dp shadow, it's a very subtle shadow, but you can see that this shadow effect is actually very present because this is a 24 dp elevation shadow. So that is for the umbra shadow under the 24 dp elevation shadow. Now if I want to create a penumbra shadow, the opacity should be 12, S should be 0. So let's come over to this next rectangle that I have here. I'll click on effects. In this case, opacity, I'll set that to 12, which is fine. Say the X value should be 0 for the penumbra shadow. The Y value should be 9. The below should be 46, right? So for the Y value, I'll come over here and put in 9. The below should be 46. Now I have something like this. And after that, the spread should be 8, right? So I'll come over here, put in a spread value of 8. Now I have this. Now this is for a 24 dp penumbra shadow. Now you can see that we have 2 different shadow effects here, right? I could come over here and also create a shadow effect for the ambient shadow, opacity 20, X0, Y11. So I'll come over here, give it an effect, change opacity to 20, which is fine. Now the X value is 0, Y is 11, below is 15. So I have 0, 11, then below should be 15. That's fine. Then over here I have that the spread is also set to 0. So I have my spread set to 0. Now I have created a 24 dp ambient shadow. Now you can see how the 24 dp elevation shadow is for the Umbra shadow, the Penumbra shadow, and the ambient shadow, right? So I have for the Umbra shadow, Penumbra shadow, and then the ambient shadow. Now you could decide to actually come up with reference shadow styles. Now remember that while we're coming up with our typography system, we came up with reference styles and the system styles. So you could use these tables to actually create a lot of shadow effects, right? And use them as your reference styles from which we are going to get your system style. So let's say I've actually created a lot of shadow effects, right? I'm just going to place this here. And this is me assuming that I've actually used the other values in those tables on material design to actually create other reference styles, right? So if you've created a lot of styles like this, by the end of the day, in trying to make your design, you are definitely not going to be using all the reference styles that you have here, right? So if these are the styles you want to use for your system or for your design, you are going to pick out these three and also save them as system styles. By the time you reference our typography system, you understand the difference between reference styles and system styles. Now, in as much as we have a table of values here given to us by material design, and in as much as we have used them to actually create shadow styles that are here, one question you may want to ask is, how do I know which particular shadow style to apply to a button? How do I know which particular shadow style to apply to which components? Because we have buttons, we have cards. And if you come over here, you can see that the shadow style that is applied to this button is different from the shadow style that will be applied to these cards that we have here. Right? So you can see that the button shadow is different from the card shadow. So how do you know which shadow style to apply to a button? How do you know which shadow style to apply to a card? And that you are going to actually determine once you start using shadows over time. But in order for us to actually make this process more organized, what we are going to do is that we are going to actually go to the Figma community and then look for an already published shadow system that we are going to use. So that as we continue to use the shadow system, we will then know how we could actually come up with our own shadow system from these references that we have here in material design. So to go to the Figma community, I'm going to simply copy this link, which is my Figma link. Now this is like opening Figma in another tab, right? And I'll paste it there. And then once it loads up, I'm going to go over to the Figma community. I could actually go over to the Figma community from this tab, right? But I don't want us to actually leave this particular design file, right? Because if I want to go to my Figma community, all I need to do is click on this drop down and go to where it says back to files. And then I will be able to go to my Figma community and look for already published styles. So what I'm going to do now is I'll wait for this to load up. And when this loads up, we are going to go to Figma community and we are going to actually bring in already published shadow styles that we could use for things like our buttons and also for cards and any other states that we actually want to represent. So if I come back here, all right, that's still loading up now. So once you've started using those particular published shadow styles, you will be able to know which of these shadow styles from the references that you actually use or make in your design. So now I'm going to come over here and then click on back to files. So it takes us back to the Figma dashboard, and then I'll click on where it says community so that I can get to the Figma community. So here in the Figma community, I'll come to where it says search community and I'll type in shadow system UI kits. And then, all right, I'll type in shadow system or shadow UI kits. Let me just put in shadow UI kits. All right, I say over here I have shadows UI kits. All right, so I'm going to click on that. Once I click on that, I'm going to open it here in Figma. And once it opens up, I'm going to actually copy that UI kit and add it to my design, because for that UI kit, all the shadow systems you are supposed to apply to buttons have already been done for you. All the ones you're supposed to apply to cards have already been done for you. So you don't have to have issues trying to know which of them you apply to buttons or which of them you apply to cards after you create them for material design. So if I come over here, you can see that under here I have button shadows, right? So in this case, I have a 2 dp button shadow, I have a 4 dp button shadow, I have this 8 dp button shadow. And you can see that the intensity of the shadow increases from a 2 dp to a 4 dp to the 8 dp and also to the 12 dp button shadow. Now these are shadow effects that you could apply to buttons with different intensity. Also we have card shadows, 16 dp, 20 dp, 24 dp. Also we have status shadows, all right, focus, overt, error, and success. Now this is a much easier way to actually create or work with a shadow system, all right, because if you decide to actually pick these values for material design, you're actually going to get a lot of shadows, but then you might be having difficulty trying to know which shadow effect you are going to apply to a button in its default state, or which shadow effect you are going to apply to a card in its default or overt state. So easiest way for you to actually do that is to work with a published shadow system, because you can see over here it says button shadow. So if I should create a particular button and I want to apply a shadow effect to it, I could just apply this 2 dp shadow effect to a default button, and of course you can see that it's a subtle shadow, so I could easily apply it to a default button and have something like this. All right, so I could apply that 2 dp button shadow to a button like this. All right, so that is one of the advantages of using this published shadow style. So I'm going to copy this. I'll copy it, and then in our own case I want us to use these published shadow styles, right? You could decide to, of course, come up with all the references for material design and choose your own shadow styles, but in our own case I want us to use these particular published shadow styles and save them as part of our style library. So over here now I have my button shadows, right? I have my card shadows and I have my status shadows. So status shadows are shadows like this. Like you can see that for this card, when I hover on it, you can see that the shadow effect actually increases, letting me know that I have hovered on it. Right? This is what we mean by status shadows, and that's why over here for the status shadows, you can see we have focused, over, error, and was success shadows. Right? Then for our card shadows, we have different elevations: 16 dp elevation, 20 dp shadow, 24 dp shadow. The same thing for our button shadows. So now that we have the shadows that we want to use for our design in terms of what we are going to be applying to the buttons, cards, and also our status shadows, the next thing becomes how do you create a style guide, right, for your shadow system. And what I'm going to do is, of course, anytime you want to create a style guide, you need to actually look at the naming convention, right? What should be the naming convention for a style guide? In my case now, to get that naming convention, I'll click on my empty canvas and I'll put in, of course, I want to create a shadow system. So I'll put in shadow system. All right, let's make that bigger so that we can see it. Let's make that 30 pixels. And I'm going to make it bold so that we can just see it over here. Select that. Okay. Let me change this font family to Titanium Web. All right, I'll change this. Let me change to black. So now I want to create a shadow system since I am using this published shadow system that I have here. Now to create my shadow system or to add this to my style library, I need a naming convention. So over here, I know that I want to create my shadow system. So I'll type in shadow system, put a /. This is already a folder. So for my shadow system, I have button shadows, I have card shadows, and I have the status shadows. So I want to start by saving all my button shadows. All right, so what I'm going to do is over here now, for the button shadows, I have 1, 2, 3, 4. So I have 4 categories under the button shadows. So the button shadows is going to be like a subfolder. So I'll come over here. I'll type in button shadows. All right, this is also a subfolder. So I'll put a /. And then my button shadows, now I'm going to save it as these names that I have here. I have 2 dp shadow. I have 4 dp shadow. I have button 8 dp shadow, and then I have this. So for my own case, I'll just copy the name that I have here, or Ctrl C to copy that, and then I'll paste it after this folder here. So I have button 2 dp shadow. In my own case, I could decide to just, of course, make this black as well. So I have something like this. So this is how I'm going to save the first one, right? Shadow system simply refers to the folder that will contain all my shadow styles that I have here. So button shadows is subfolder that is going to contain all the button shadows. But whatever name that you put at the end depends on what you actually have as the name over here. So for this first one, I want to save it as button 2dp shadow, and that's why I've written this name here as button 2dp shadow, right? By the time I want to save the next one, which is button 4dp shadow, I'm going to change this to button 4dp shadow, just like that. So since I want to save these particular button shadows, I'll select the first one. But as to copy the naming convention first, I'll come over here. I'll Ctrl C to copy that. Now I want to save this, right? So I'll come over here, select this particular layout that has that shadow effect. Once I have that layout selected, I'll come over to my style guide, or I'll come over to my properties panel and then try to save it there. But remember that these shadow effects are already published, right? Which simply means that they are already saved as styles. So once I select this, if I select this, for example, if I come over here, you can see that it's already saved as a style. So it comes as the saved style. If I select this now, I come over here, it's already saved as a style. But if I should click on my empty canvas, right, and come over to where it says effect styles here, I don't have a shadow effect saved there, right? So these came as save styles because we remember that we took them from the Figma community. So they were already published and saved as styles in the Figma community. So once you bring them here, those save styles are also going to come with them. So what you can do is detach them from those styles. So I'll select this, come over here, click on this icon and say detach style, detach it. And by detaching it, the style is still applied to the object. You can see that the shadow effect is still here, just that it has now been detached from the name with which it was formerly saved, right? On the Figma community. I'll come over here, select this, detach, select this, detach, select this, detach, which is fine. Come over here, select this. I'm just detaching it from the name. You can see that the shadow effect is still there. It doesn't leave, right? So click on detach, select this, detach, select this, detach. So I'll select this. Okay, I've detached that. Select the next one. I'll come over here, detach it. Select this one, detach it. Right, select this, detach it. So now I've detached it from the naming convention that came with it. So now I want to save it with my own naming convention. So I'll select this, copy it, which is the name that I want to use to save it, right? And then now that I've copied it, the next thing I'm going to do is I'll come to each of them and begin to save them. So I want to save for my button shadows first. I'll select this, come over here. You can see that. Let's make a copy of this and let's explain something. I'll make a copy of this first and then bring the copy here. Now, after detaching, if I should select this particular layout, you can see the shadow values that are added to it in order for them to actually create this particular effect on that card. Right? If I select this one, you can see these are the shadow effects that were added to this particular layout. Now, two shadow effects were added, two drop shadow effects. If I click on the first one, you can see that over here I have 0, 2, 2 with this color and an opacity of 6%. If I click on the second one, this is 0, 2, 4 with this color and an opacity of 6%. So that is how they created this particular shadow style that you have here. Alright, so that's just what that means. So since we just want to save the shadow styles and use them exactly the way they have been created, I'll click on this now. As I click on it, under effects, right, I'll simply come over to, I don't have to change the values anymore. I'll leave the values the way they are. I'll come over to this icon that says apply styles. Click on that. Once I click on it, this menu comes up. I'll come over here to this plus icon that says create style. Click on it. Once I click on it, I now have the ability to create a particular style with my own naming convention. I'll click on this and I'll Ctrl V to paste the name in there. Alright. Now, under description, you could decide to put in a description. In this case, this is a very, very light shadow. So that shadow is what is used for the default state of buttons. I could put in subtle shadow. You can decide to leave that description field empty if you want to. Subtle shadow. Alright. Now, in my case, I just want to put in default buttons. Default button states, which simply means I'll be using this for my default button states. Now that's fine. So I can click on create style. Automatically, I now have that here as part of a style, right? I think I had one old style there before. Let's remove that. And I have that as part of a style. So under effect styles, you can see it says shadow system. If I click on that drop down, I have button shadow. If I click on this, under button shadow, I have this as one of the save styles. So quickly, we are going to actually save each and every one of these styles that we have here. So I will select the next one quickly and then come over to where it says effect again. Click on this icon that says apply styles and then click on this plus icon that says create style. Automatically, I'll have this. I will Ctrl V to put in that name. But in this case, what I have for this next one is 4 DP shadows. So I'll come over here and change. Let's just select this, then go to the last text that we have there. I'll change this from 2 to, let's say, this is no longer 2 DP. So this is 4. So this is 4 DP shadow. That's fine. Click on create style. You can decide to put in any description that you want here. Click on create style. That's done. I'll come over here, select this. Do the same thing. Alright. And then for my case now, I'm going to put in 8 DP shadow, Ctrl V. But in case of 2 DP, I'll change that from 2 to, let's say, 8 DP. I'll move that to make that 8 create style. That's fine. I'll come over here, click on this, do the same thing quickly. Paste in the name. And this is 12 DP. So I'll click on this and then put in 12 DP shadow. Click on create style. Now I've created these as styles in my style library. So if I click on my empty canvas and I come over to where it says effect styles. See, under button styles, I have 1, 2, 3, 4. They are all done, right? So that's for that. So that's for button shadows. After button shadows, I have card shadows. So in this case, I'm going to come over here. And then, since I am now creating for another subfolder, which is card shadow. Remember that we are now done with button shadows. So anytime we create a button and want to apply a shadow, we use our button shadows. Now we have card shadows. So I'll come over here to the naming convention. I'm no longer working with button shadows. I'm now working with card shadows. So I'll come over here and put in, change that button to card. Right? You can leave it like this, card shadows, or you can decide to put in a hyphen after the card. Either case works fine. You can do something like this, card shadows, and you are still fine. Alright, so take note of that. So I can put in the hyphen or I can leave it like this and I'm still fine. So for card shadows, the first one I'm saving is the 16 DP shadow. So in this case, I have card 16 DP shadow. So this is no longer a button, right? So I'll change this to card. Just where I have it there. First one is 16 DP, so I'll change this to 16. Which is fine. Let me just copy this. And now I can come over here and save this for the shadow. So you select this particular frame here that carries the shadow effect. Because if I should select it, you see it combines everything. Now it's not this particular layer that carries the shadow effect. What carries the shadow effect is this particular frame inside of it, the layout, right? So select the frame. And then once you select it, come over here now and save that as a style. So quickly, I'll put in this Ctrl V there. So this is our first card shadow. I'll click on create, right? So by saving the first one, let's see what we have. And you can see that under effects, I have my shadow system. Under my shadow system, I have button shadows. If I expand that, I'll see all the shadows that I can add to my button, which is fine. Then later on, I have another folder for card shadows. If I expand that, I can see my card shadows. I've already saved one. So now let's save for the others very quickly. I'll select this, come over here. Come over to where it says effects, alright, and try to save that. Ctrl V. In this case, you can see that the elevation is different. Now, the first one was 16 dp, this is 20 dp. So go to the elevation and change that to from 16 to 20, right? So I'll make this 20 dp. I'll click on create style, which is fine. Select the next one. Do the same thing. In this case, I have 24 dp, right? I'll come over here, change this from 16 to 24. Create style, quickly select the next one. Make sure that you click on this icon that is close to effects, right? When you want to save the style, because a shadow is actually an effect. Ctrl V, change this from 16 now to 28 dp. Since this is 28. Create style. So now I'm done with my card styles. Now the next styles that I want to create for my shadows are my status shadows to indicate system status like over state, focus state, and the likes. Alright, so to do that, I now have a new folder which is status shadows. So I'll come over here. In this case, I'm no longer dealing with card shadows, right? I'm now dealing with status shadows. I'll change this to status, which is fine. And now for my status shadows, the first one I have there is the 4 dp shadow. So I'll come over here. Change this to 4 dp shadow. Let's remove this. Let's put in 4 there. So let's copy this new name or copy this. Okay, this is also a status shadow. All right, it's not a card shadow. So I'll change this from card to status, which is fine. Then copy the entire name, Ctrl C, and then come and save my status shadow. So I'll select the first one here, and then come over here, save that very quickly. Click on create style, that's fine. Select the next one, paste in the name, and then in this case, this is 8dp, so this is no longer 4dp. So I'll come over here, change my 4dp to 8. Click on create style, that's fine. Select the next, this is 12dp. Save it in the same manner. Alright, now in this case, I have 12dp, change that to 12, which is fine. Then click on the very last one. Now this is 12dp error shadow. This is 12dp success shadow. So what I can do is, while I was saving this, I could select this now, come back to the name, or better still, let's save the last one. Let's save the last one. Ctrl V. And since this is 12dp, let me change that to 12. But this is 12dp, 12dp, right? In this case, this is error shadow, this is success shadow. So I could come over here and change this to, instead of just shadow, I could just put in success over there. Show that it's a success shadow, which is fine. Click on create style. Alright, that's fine. So if I should select this one that I saved before, let's see what the name says here. I can click on this, and then you can see I'm trying to actually put in, I already saved it as 12dp shadow, but I want to include the fact that this is an error shadow. So since I've already saved it, all you need to do is select it. Once you select it, you are going to see the name with which you saved it here, right? Click on this icon in front of it. You can see this is the name which I have saved it. Click on this icon here that says edit style. I can click on it, and now I have status 12dp shadow. In this case, now this, I want this to be the error shadow, so I'll come over here. In front of shadow, I'll put in error. Alright, you can decide to put in a space or put in an underscore there, and you are still fine. Okay, so now that I'm done, I'll click on any empty space. Now I have that saved. So with that, now I have saved all my shadow styles. So if I should come over to my style library, because now a combination of styles is what is referred to as a style library. So if I come to my properties panel, it says styles. So under this style simply refers to your style library. So you are going to be having text styles, color styles, effect styles. In this case, for my effect styles, I have shadow styles. Now you can see that even our layout guide styles is here, which is our layout grid system that we created. The combination of these styles is what is referred to as coming up with a style library. So now for my effect styles, I have shadow styles. So if I should expand shadow styles, I have 3 categories of styles under my shadow styles. I have my button shadows, I have my card shadows, and I have my status or shadows. So under button shadows, these are the ones that I've saved, which is fine. Under card shadows, these are the ones that I've saved, which is fine. Under status shadows, these are the ones that I've saved, which is fine. So I could decide now to come over here and delete what I have here. I could select this and delete it, right? I don't need it anymore, or I may not need it anymore since I already have them saved their styles. You can see that after deleting it, if I come over here under effect styles, I still have my shadow system, button styles, cast shadows, and status shadows. So you could delete it, or you could decide to just leave it over there, right? It doesn't matter. Now that I've gotten my shadow system, let's say for example I am carrying out my high fidelity design, and then I design a button. So let's quickly design a button. In this case, we are going to design a fill button. I'll click on this, and then click on the empty canvas, and then put in a button that says, let's just put in fill button as the label there. Alright, and now let's click on Shift A. Remember to create a button. In this case, I'm going to give this button a padding of 12 horizontally and then 12 vertically. Now I have something like this, right? So let's say I've created this button, and then I give this button a fill color of white, then change the text color over there to some form of dark. Now I have something like this, right? And let's say this is our button created. Let me just hold and expand on this button to increase the width. And let's say I have this button on a layout, just like I have it here on Amazon. I have this button on a particular layout. So I want to hold this button and put it on a layout. You can see that right now the button is on this layer, but the button is looking very flat, right? So what you could do is apply your shadow system. So I'll select it. And once I come to my shadow effects, go to where it says effect. In this case, I will no longer be adding an effect by clicking on the plus icon and adding the effect manually. No. All I need to do is go to my styles. So how do I go to my styles? Come to this icon that says apply styles. So you want to apply the styles that you've saved. Click on it and you're going to see all your shadow system. Button shadow, right? Card shadows. I have status shadows. In this case, I want to apply a button shadow. Now this is a default button with no overt state, just like what we have over here. This is a default button, right? A default button simply means the way the button looks before interacting with it. That's what makes it a default button. I have not interacted with this button. You can see how it's looking. So in that case, I'm going to need a subtle shadow for a default button. So for my fill button, I'll come over to this very first one now, which is actually a subtle shadow, which is a 2dp elevation shadow. I'll click on it. Automatically, you can now see that this button is now looking more like something that I can interact with. Unlike what we had before, where there was no shadow effect. You can see that the button is looking flat on the surface, right? As compared to this. Okay, so with this button, you know that you can interact with it because you can see that there's an elevation that makes it look very good, right? Unlike what we actually have here that is looking very flat. So this is how you come up with a shadow system. So now we know that we now have a shadow system that we can use. Now, if you decide to actually want to create some form of system status based on interaction of the button, let's say when I hover the button, I could decide that the color of the button could change, just like what we have over here. If I hover on this, you can see that the color changes, right? That is you indicating system status. There are different ways to indicate system status. You could use color, or you could even use a shadow effect. Now, if this is the default state of the button and I want to actually create a hover state for this button, right? I could make a copy here and go back and apply a stronger shadow effect. So I'll go to effects. In this case, the default took 2dp. For the hover state, I want to make it 4dp, right? I have something like this. Okay, so if, for example, I decide to prototype this button state. So if we actually want to prototype this, okay, first of all, we need to make them variants of one another, right? So in my case now, I'm going to select this, right? Make it a parent component. Before I prototype it, I'll go back to design. Make it a parent component, which is fine. Select this, make it a parent component. All right. And then select both of them and then come over here, combine as variant. So I have two buttons here as what? As variant. So now I can select this, go back to prototype, hold and drag on it to this next frame, and then set the prototype interaction, right? So while hovering, I want it to actually change to this particular frame and I want it to happen instantly, which is fine. So now that I've created that interaction, let's see what happens if I want to see that interaction on a display. So I'll just come over here, select any particular copy, which is an instance, paste here, all right? And then click on this frame and click on display. Come over here, let me click on preview so we can preview what happens now when I hover on this. Now that I've applied a subtle shadow and a shadow with a stronger intensity to that particular button for it to actually indicate system status. So while this is loading up, I think I can hold on it and then increase the size so we can see it clearly when it eventually loads up. So let me have this selected, this frame. So while this is loading up also, let's see if we can actually have the display on another tab. So okay, now I think it's now open. If I should hover on it, let's see what happens. Drag this here. Right. Now you can see what happens when I hover on this particular button, right? This is the default state. So once I hover, you can see that with the default state, it has this very subtle shadow effect. Right? Once I hover on this, you can see there is a change. Letting me know that I've hovered on this button. There is more shadow effect presenting the hover state. So these are some of the applications of shadow effects, and that is why you are going to need a shadow system as part of your design system documentation. Okay, so now we are done with coming up with an industry standard grid system, industry standard typography system, industry standard shadow system. In our next class, we are going to look at how to come up with an industry standard iconography system.